All right, so Ian Hazzikostas got into an interview with PC Gamer. Title of this article is World of Warcraft Game Director details what combat add-ons are safe and which will be eliminated in the coming purge. So Game Director Ian Hazzikostas recently warned players that add-ons and mods that predict or help players respond to things that are happening in combat will be disabled in the future. We caught up with him in a far-ranging interview to find out if specifically what things would be affected and why. You have your quest helpers, you have your gathering add-ons, you have your role-playing add-ons. All of that stuff is no concern. PvP add-ons might still tell you what classes you're facing, but they won't tell you what cooldowns they've used. Auction house add-ons won't be touched. So this is kind of interesting for a couple perspectives, right? For PvE players, a lot of PvE players actually end up using these PvP add-ons that tell you what cooldowns that they've used, right? Whenever you think about things like that, think about Omni CD. Omni CD is like a really easy conduit. Like that was a PvP add-on first that PvEers started using just because it's obviously super useful to know who's pressed what ability when. In the same vein, interrupts. I think that interrupts are probably in the same context. What cooldowns they used. Interrupt is a cooldown in this context. So it sounds like maybe those things are both going to be going away in some capacity. But obviously, random QOL stuff and gathering add-ons and roleplay add-ons, none of those are intended on being touched. He says the goal at the end of the day is to get to a point where if asked, hey, do I need to use add-ons to play? The answer is, well, they give you a lot of options to customize your experience, but no, it's up to you. And today, if we're being honest, we cannot say that. Yeah, of course you can't. So it's kind of a two-pronged issue, right? It's kind of like in one vein, the add-ons are very powerful, so of course you're going to need them to be able to complete the content, but also at the same point, Blizzard continues to create and design encounters, dungeons, experiences that add-ons make it 20-30% easier, and potentially in some instances you go up to an encounter like Brew Twist or Ovanax, and it's not that fight is... people like to use this term a lot of the times where they're like, the weak auras played the game for you. I don't actually believe that that's ever really true, nor has it ever really been true. But the weak auras, in some instances, like the Brew Twist or Ovanax example, made that fight doable to begin with. So it's not that they played the game for you, it's that it actually made it work. He also said that Blizzard won't be taking away combat logs or aura hooks in patches 11.1.7 or 11.2, which leaves the door open for the final patches of the War Within expansion, including the pre-patch for the upcoming Midnight expansion. So the earliest this could actually happen is probably expansion start, if I had to wager a guess, or maybe the pre-patch. This is meant to be a philosophical kickoff and the beginning of the conversation with the community, Hazzikostas said. Add-ons have been a part of the game since its earliest days. If we were to just come along one day and rip that band-aid off, it would be jarring. Yeah. So basically what he's saying here is that it's not all add-ons, but there's a significant portion of not significant, but there's some portion of add-ons that they believe are a little bit too far over the line, and you wouldn't like rip the band-aid off and delete all add-ons, but you would have a conversation with the community about the add-ons that are the most effective to the point where you feel like you have to play with add-ons, if that makes sense. Mods that help and annoy. Blizzard's taking these steps because of player complaints about how many add-ons that are needed to successfully complete raid and dungeon encounters. Blizzard will also be working on improving the in-game cooldown manager, visual effects, and improvements to the game's UI, edit mode, audio cues, and handling of nameplates for players and enemies. I mean, these are good things, right? So I think that pretty much everybody agrees the cooldown manager is just objectively a little bit worse than a weak aura HUD suite. Like, I mean, am I logged in right now? Yeah. So take a look at my LA Shaman here. You're not getting this with a cooldown manager, like it or not. The resources that are shown in game aren't particularly good. I don't know how it is for all classes as well, but for Moonkin as well, like default gameplay has a hard time of telling you like eclipse states and stuff like that. But so like the cooldown manager still has a long way to go, but I do think that like what they're trying to do, where they've updated the UI a little bit with edit mode, they are adding in the cooldown manager to try to give you an alternative to using a weak or a HUD, and then audio cues and handling of nameplates for players and enemies. Okay, so handling of nameplates for players and enemies, nameplates in this game defaults are just garbage. Like there's a reason that pretty much everybody uses some nameplate add-on. It's because the default nameplates just don't give you like they don't really tell you anything. They don't even tell you like realistically if the mobs have like loss of control effects on them sometimes. Buffs or debuffs are difficult to track. Obviously, there are the very extreme examples of things that are shown that we use on nameplates, such as like the bigwigs timers, where they tell us what's the cooldown on a specific ability on the nameplates. I wouldn't be shocked if those actually do end up going away in some capacity, though, considering what Ian has been stating in this interview so far. But let's keep reading. Hazukosis has also said that the company's heard loud and clear the player feedback to the first basic rollout of the cooldown manager, which was part of the recent troubled 11.15 patch. Players decried its simplicity, lack of functionality, and the fact that it was not able to be customized. Ironically, some mod makers immediately created add-ons to improve it. Yeah, I mean, I think that the issue with the cooldown manager was the absolute lack of customization. Realistically, you want to be able to track the abilities and cooldowns that you want to be tracked, not the ones, or not all of them like Blizzard did, or, you know, in some instances they actually left a couple off, which was a little bit ridiculous. Somebody asks, what about the unit frames? They're so bad to customize. Yeah, I mean, the unit frames are pretty bad too. I mean, that's why I use Cell, right? Because the base unit frames are really not as bad as the nameplates, at least. But the issue with the base unit frames are that, how do you say this? There's no ability to be able to track buffs and debuffs on the unit frames. Like, there needs to be like a whitelist and a blacklist, I think, at minimum, to be able to actually tell what's going on with the base unit frames. Especially for healers, right? Like healers with base unit frames, I feel like there's just like a lot of information that's left out there. Additionally, being able to tell if a person has like a defensive pressed on their character and stuff like that, that's just not easy to do with the base default frames. Whereas for a healer, one of the minimum levels of functionality is that you're able to be like, oh, I see that this person is pressed any wall, right? Or I see this person is pressed bark skin, you know, age, like what is this wall? Stone bulwark totem. You know, this person has fade up. They're in dispersion. Those kind of things, right? So, like, I think that the default unit frames also needs to be looked at a little bit. But I actually don't think the default unit frames are so far off. I think that, like, if you were not a healer, for example, you could probably get away with playing with the default unit frames. Now, you're not getting all the information that you would want, nor that Blizzard should realistically be able to give you. But I think a simple whitelist and blacklist of buffs and debuffs on the unit frames would probably solve a lot of that. Especially like defensive usage and stuff like that. We know we're not going to replace a fully in-depth customizable add-on that you've been using for years and tailor to your personal gameplay with something that we have as an initial fixed offering, he said. But we're getting a whole bunch of feedback in ways in which it would need to change. We also need to add customization and improve it to make it feel like it could be a reasonable substitute for a more advanced power user. I think this is good. Like, realistically, this isn't necessarily for me in the current way that I play the game, particularly like the cooldown manager replacing like a weak aura HUD, probably not happening. But I do remember back in 2015, whenever I started the game, people kept telling me, you gotta download this add-on, you gotta download this add-on, you gotta download this add-on. And the first thing I was like, this game is just completely dog shit. This game is really, really bad. The fact that you have to download a bunch of add-ons to be able to play this game, how garbage is this game? And it's been like that for 10 years, and I feel like I'm a little bit more jaded because it's been so long since I've been at that point. But if you're just jumping into the game recently, and you're told, yeah, you need to download a bunch of add-ons to actually play the game effectively, that sucks. And I think that's why Classic and Classic Hardcore is actually kind of fun, because the first thing I did was not download 15 add-ons that I needed to be able to level or something. I just, maybe downloaded a leveling helper, and that was about it. In-game solutions may not be as good, and that could be okay. Yeah, and I mean, I think that the in-game solutions, if they're not as good, that's fine, assuming that they're at least close enough, right? The task ahead of Blizzard will be challenging, he said, but added that having a fixed development team with slower update cycle doesn't mean that Blizzard's solution should be a we have details at home meme situation, or maybe that's okay if it is. Some of it's being guided by feedback to understand how we can bridge the gap for a majority of our players, and to some extent accepting and hopefully getting folks to accept that it's 96% of perfect, Hazukosis has said. Your performance relying on the rotation helper Hikili is still inferior to someone who has it ingrained in their muscle memory. There's always a higher skill ceiling. It's a Is it a critical flaw if the highlighted combat assistant recommended your next ability is not reflecting the latest theory crafting that was discovered yesterday? I don't know if that should be a deal breaker. I actually agree with this. So it's like, there's always going to be more that you can do just as a player, but I think lowering, I would say lowering the ceiling, but like lowering the ceiling a little bit in terms of like add-on computational functionality and what the add-ons can actually show you in some instances, and raising the floor a lot as to what's being shown at a default, I think is actually a pretty good way of showing players. And there's a lot of players that are going to turn on the rotation helper, the default rotation helper. They're going to be okay with playing default UI. And even if it is only, again, like he said, 96% of perfect, the rotation helper stuff is kind of interesting, because the more you look into it, you realize that the rotation helper is showing, let's say, 95% within sim DPS, like absolute maximum sim DPS. But that's mostly okay. There's a lot of specs that actually play the rotation relatively similar to what the rotation helper light up functionality has in game, and I actually think that that's pretty good. So I don't know. I think there's a large, I don't say large, but I think there's a decent amount of players that would at least have some value in this. And I think for particularly like newer players as well, I think it's kind of important to have that kind of thing. He said that he was open to the idea of allowing players shared loadouts, like the text strings currently used to share talents. That might improve the rotation assist for those who wanted the latest theory. Oh, like you share your rotation assist APL to other people. Huh. That could be interesting, actually. Oh, I don't know if they're gonna go. That's actually a good idea, I think. That's an interesting idea. He said the topic has come up with context of edit mode layouts and other things we want to empower people to share. Most people get shared dog shit rotations. Well, how I kind of view it is like, if you really cared about your rotation beyond the base default rotation, you would go to a class Discord, for example, where they would have like a string that lists out the most up-to-date rotation helper rotation, right? And allow you to import that. And I think that could be actually pretty good for some people. Or there's some way that you can scrape it off the SimCraft APL or something like that, right? Something along those lines. The smallest change possible to achieve the goal. Hazukosa said that the team had discussed many approaches and believed that this was the least invasive path that would still accomplish the goal. This is not us setting out to smash out a bunch of add-ons, he said. The way we're approaching this is what is the least collateral damage that we can cause while addressing this issue. The goal is to build up the native functionality of our UI to increasingly narrow the gap between the players who are using add-ons that assist with competitive function and those who are not. Like I was saying, yeah, lowering the ceiling a little bit and increasing the floor. Once we are most of the way there, there's going to be that last mile that consists of things that we honestly don't think are super healthy for the game. Yeah, that's when functionality will be turned off. Yeah, so he's talking about turning off functionality for something like the ability to be able to track your teammates' cooldowns in PvP or track their cooldowns in Mythic Plus. Previously, Blizzard experimented with private auras that could not be read by add-ons and weak auras, but players circumvented this with in-game macros that told the mods when players saw that they had conditions that had been kept secret. Gotcha. The aura is private, but you can just make a separate macro that pipes information in. And now, whoops, you wiped because someone hit the wrong macro, had a typo in their macro. Great, now we succeeded in making this even more frustrating. Let's never do this again. Yeah. Private auras were bad. That was troll. The company is building in all of its functionality in part because they know players will find ever more circuitous routes to get the information. If they don't, if boss ability timelines aren't a thing, he suggested players might turn to YouTube videos or recorded sound files that would provide audio cooldowns when pressed at the start of heavily scripted encounters. Yeah, I mean, so say they do delete the ability to like track interrupts on my UI, right? Say I zone into a dungeon and there's no longer the ability to be able to track interrupts. Now, I could just not track interrupts, or alternatively, I could put my interrupt like a say macro or a /yell macro attached to my interrupt, and every single time I pressed my kick, it would be like interrupting, right? And then it would send everybody's interrupt for me on cooldown. So there's maybe some ways to work around this. Obviously, that's a good workaround, but hopefully Blizzard finds a way to not allow you to do something like that, I guess, if what they're stating is true with their intentions here. Dungeon and raid fights will still be just as challenging, he said, but just not in a way that requires perfectly working weak auras. Our goal is to deliver a baseline and consistent level of difficulty that meets our players' expectations. I've seen discussion as to whether or not WoW is harder than it used to be, and if you measure it by player success rates, then no, it's not. We might tune a heroic end boss for AOTC to be something that's going to take a couple of a dozen attempts. For guilds, that's the core audience. And what it takes to hit that mark is continually increase in terms of complexity because our players have gotten more sophisticated. So it's not that the content is harder, but it's not harder if you only measure it by player success rates. But it is harder because players just as a whole are more sophisticated. So it's kind of both, right? But who came first, the chicken or the egg? Did players become more sophisticated because the content became harder, or did the content become harder because the players became more sophisticated? Actually don't know the answer. With this move, Blizzard hopes to dismantle the arms race between add-on developers and boss mechanics. A fight like Blood Queen Lathanel and Ice Crown, okay, I don't know this fight, had one simple mechanic: who to bite when you had Vampiric Lust and you were about to get mind controlled. That ramped in difficulty over the course of the fight and would have been trivialized by combat weak aura, he noted. No stress, no confusion, no need for communication, no need for backups. A fight that had excited, frantic moments in 2009, 2010 gets transformed into something that's pretty ho-hum. Well, I think the landscape of gaming has changed a lot too. I don't disagree with what he's saying, but here's the thing as well. Players are more willing than ever before to actually research fights outside of just blind progressing them themselves, and they're more willing than ever to continue to get research on their class in a class Discord and learn about their rotation. And just, there's a higher expectation of you just not being, I guess, bad, right? Which means, of course, the design of the encounters are going to have to follow in suit, where there's this expectation that there is at least, boss timelines and some level of research that's put into the fights in advance. Because, in the past, you weren't always expected to watch a fat boss guide for doing a boss. But now, I think there is at least a minimum level of expectation, even in heroic raiding guilds, that you do at least read a guide in some capacity. Now, it's not the truth for all guilds, but in heroic level guilds, it is, at least in some capacity. And in mythic guilds, you're kind of recommended to watch a Dratnos documentary on a specific encounter and then read this 20-page raid plan before you actually step foot into a raid. So it's not just the weak auras, but it's more about how you're willing to play the game, right? It's kind of the why try if I'm not putting in 100% of my effort kind of feeling, right? Like, why would you go forth and actually put in any effort if you weren't giving it your all? But, in 2009 or 2010, they might not have gone out of their way to read a guide because, like, who cares? And modern raids, players might see happy changes like a reduction in the number of bosses that frequently place a random damage swirls on the group. A mechanic the team has come to lean on because add-ons can't predict or help with it. Yeah, so swirlies is what we call these. Our classes weren't designed under the assumption that you're going to have unpredictable movement every few seconds, making those encounters less fun for casters. We just want more variety in a diverse design space. Yeah, I mean, this expansion, Liberation of Undermine, was kind of critiqued because of how many bosses had just, like, insane swirly overload. Like, the Galliwick suppression mechanics just got 1 billion swirlies. Mugsy's got, like, a decent amount of them as well. Sprocketmonger Locked-in-Stock has a bunch of swirlies. Like, all these fights just have, like, a bunch of, like, random ground effects. Six Bunk Junker, same thing. A bunch of them, like, they redid the VFX on the swirlies, and they used the hell out of them this expansion, or this season, rather. But yeah, I don't know what they mean whenever they say they want more variety in a diverse design space. Because they only talked about one mechanic that they said that they would like to use less, which I don't think that a strong use of swirlies makes it feel like all the fights are the same. But I do think that over the last couple of expansions, I don't want to say fights have felt samey, but I feel like they've been like going with a pretty specific blueprint for how they're looking to design fights. Which I feel like that's kind of clear if you've actually been progging the last couple of tiers. The toughest modern bosses with mechanics that require players to clump up or head to specific spots might give a few more seconds to respond or have fewer spots go to in a world without combat add-ons, he said. Yeah, I mean, I think that Jailer's like probably the most notable example of this, where you had 6 players get picked and have to jump in a hole within 10 seconds. You're not going to be able to, just as a player, identify whether or not you're doubling up on a hole or not. Same with the Brew Twister Overnax stuff that I was talking about earlier, where you, especially on Mythic, you had to have 2 players on an egg at the exact same time, but you only had 12 seconds to do that. Of course, you're going to need a weak aura that assigns you what world marker you're going to. There's no way of being able to YOLO it, and it's not even like people wouldn't want to YOLO it. It's that it's literally fucking impossible. And it's kind of like I was talking about earlier. Some people are stupid and they go, the add-ons are playing the game for you. But it's literally that the game would not be playable without the add-ons. It's like whenever Paragon killed Archimond in 750 pulls. They YOLO'd their movement. So Archimond had this thing where you had to like bait lasers off of people, and if you weren't standing in the correct spot, you would get cleaved by somebody else's laser. And what Method ended up doing, and they killed the boss in 300 pulls, is they designed a radar weak aura that showed you whether or not you were in the line with somebody else's arrow, and that allowed you to actually do the mechanic. And it saved Method 350 pulls over Paragon. Like, yeah. And even Sprockenmonger needing to look at who had red and blue and hasn't soaked would be insane with how little time you have. Yeah, and I mean, I think that I think that he's right in the sense of they can start looking to reduce some of the computational functionality, but at the same point, they have to be able to design fights that are different. But they cannot be like, yep, 100% of people are participating in this mechanic. I think that's something that I've actually gone away from. I talked about that blueprint a couple of times, is they've designed a lot of fights where 100% of people have to participate in mechanics, and there aren't mechanic doers a lot of the times in your guild. Like, there's a couple of fights, I think like One Arm Bandit with like who's shooting the coins and whatnot. There's like some fights that are like that, but in general, it's like 100% of people have to participate in every single mechanic, and that's just kind of how modern raiding has changed. Where in the past, you would have very specific people doing specific jobs on the fight, and then some other people are doing kind of a different job. Like, even if you look back to things like, even as recent as BFA, I think like Crucible Storms is a good example, where one person was like off tankling Restless Cabal. There was a couple people on Uunat that were doing the crown, and then there were some people who had a mechanic, but their main mechanic, like the rest of the raid's main mechanic, was like stack up and move together, which is like a very different experience than everybody has to interact with this crown. And so they've kind of moved forward where everybody's interacting with every single mechanic, and it's like all 20 people have to be in the same kind of like Styx Bunk Junker too. Everybody gets a ball, like, and you wiped this stupid ass boss because somebody doesn't know how to roll the ball correctly, and you're like, this is just a waste of time. But yeah. So it's kind of on class design, but they're stating that it's not just on class design. It's an intricate dance, and the reason that they designed classes like this is because they knew that players were going to be so sophisticated with the add-on functionality. So it's kind of interesting to think about. No changes for Classic. These changes will likely not be implemented in Classic, where the team is careful to avoid messing with history. New features like the damage meter might be rolled out, but combat log and aura access is unlikely to be turned off. You don't need weak auras for fucking Classic. It's like, nobody's downloading weak auras for Classic because you don't need them. Oh, Gar is meleeing me to death. Like, like, you don't need it. I think, frankly, this will stop letting us off the hook whenever we fail to do so, he said. And if you're raiding Katamari ball. Oh, if you're riding a Katamari ball and sticks and you run into one of these 3 nameplates, you wipe the raid, but there's 90 things on your screen. Good luck visually parsing that. Yes, dude, that's why Styx was 115 pulls for the race world first. It's because territorial bombshells spawns are like a ridiculous mechanic. It's just the most ridiculous mechanic possible. You're literally rolling around on this ball, and if you accidentally contact this territorial bombshell, you immediately wipe your raid. Like, how is that a 4th boss of a raid? Like, just that is like the most ridiculous 4th boss of a raid I've ever seen. And yeah, I mean, if there's a way that they can make it more reasonable, yeah, this is fine, but contacting these guys and it just wipes your raid is ridiculous. Also, yeah, good luck at figuring out what people started. Instead of having their own nameplates for the territorial bombshells, whenever they were on the ball, what they had was this big like icon that they were using in Weak Wars that was like, do not hit, and it's like this text on their screen. Yes, stop. And it was a big stop sign. That's exactly what it was. Yeah. It's a stop sign. It's like, do not run this over. The fact that you need a literal fucking stop sign on a Weak War to make sure you don't hit this bombshell, I think it's like indicative of a problem here. Visual customization of nameplates, including how big they are or what they look like, will still be allowed, but using conditional logic to change the way they look because of something the player or enemy is doing or a buff or debuff they have likely won't be. Well, okay, that kind of sucks. On one hand, I understand that. At the same point, the ability to be able to like change their color based on whether or not I have threat on the mobs or based on what the mob type is. Like, I actually use a lot of color customizations for nameplates in order to be able to see what I should be looking to expect out of them. Like this light blue color I have is, these are all my casters, right? Like all the casters in every single pack is going to be this light blue color. All of the default like red mobs, they're just going to end up being red. They don't really do anything. And there's this dark blue mob that either requires an interrupt or is typically they tend to be like higher HP mobs, or they also require a kick, right? And I think that reducing that kind of stuff, I don't say conditional logic, but you know, being able to change what they look like based on the buffs and debuffs and like what the mobs are kind of sucks. I also like some of the plater packs that change the color of the nameplates based on whether or not you have dots on the mob. Like I don't know. I feel less positive about this specifically, but that's because I think that, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it'll be better. But having just like blanket default nameplates for everything, not exactly fantastic. I like the ability, like I don't have this on any of my characters, but I've seen some plater packs that like if you dot a mob with Moonfire or Sunfire, you say you have Frost Shock on them, they change from like a light red to a dark red. That way you always know that you have them dotted or something like that. And that's all. I think I actually like the ability to be able to customize based on conditional logic. Now, it depends on what the conditional logic is, right? The moment at which you start to use the conditional logic of boss mechanics or mob mechanics, that's when it starts to get a little bit hairy for me. But the moment at which it's threat, dots, being able to just like default recolor nameplates, those things based on default recolor nameplates based on what mob ID it is, those are the things I actually like about nameplates. I actually wouldn't like those to actually go away. But yeah. He said it's all pretty speculative, as the team is still working to solve the problems that players have created. Mods for lethal casts and dungeons, for example, should be telegraphed much better, perhaps negating the need for mods that alert the players when something bad is coming. Yeah, I mean, Max and Dratnos talked about this whenever they had a chance to interview Ian, and Dratnos and Max were talking about how good the what was this dungeon? The Arakara casters were whenever they were casting this web bolt volley, this web mage. Whenever they're casting this revolting volley, Dratnos is like, yeah, and then they get big and green. And I'm just like, dude, on God, I never even could tell that they were getting big and green, because I swear they were just like in the middle of a pack with like 5 other mobs. There's no chance that you're going to be able to see that kind of stuff. I do think that they need better telegraphing, but if you're going to reduce the ability to be able to like tell what's happening, I think you just need less lethal casts in general. And I know that's a bit difficult because Mythic Plus is like this infinitely scaling system, but the days in which this mob spams Void Bolt on me on cooldown, and you need to rotate kicks. If they're removing the ability to be able to see an interrupt tracker, they can't have Void Bolt be a spammable ability. It's just not a fucking thing. Like, it should have like an internal cooldown of like 8 seconds and cast once every 8 seconds, because it's the mobs that cast on random players too. It's not necessarily the ones that cast on the tank, although the ones that cast on the tank are a little bit more tricky in a different way. But the ones that cast on random players and can hit you for 70% of your HP and put you in a vulnerable position to die to basically any other group damage, that's... So you really have to think about these things. You have to be super careful whenever you start to look at stuff like this. I don't disagree with what he's saying. I actually think that what he's saying is correct, but you have to be very, very careful whenever you're looking to do stuff like this. Tracking groups of abilities will no longer function in add-ons after the changes, so things like other players' cooldowns won't be visible. That might in turn lead to dungeons with fewer interrupts in a pack of mobs, which might in turn lead to less reliance on classes with abilities that stop a whole pack of enemies while casting. Yeah, so I think they have two problems here. First and foremost, I think they have this issue where there are a lot of classes, especially whenever they have the Dragonflight talent tree rework. Pretty much every class has like 3, 4, and 5 stops. Here, hold on, let me show you something here. So let me open up, and I'm going to slow the pack. Now, I'm going to stun the pack. Now, I'm going to stun the pack again. Bang, second cap totem. And now I'm going to walk up and press this 30-second cooldown thunderstorm on... 25-second cooldown thunderstorm on the mobs. That's a little bit ridiculous, right? Every class has that. Back in my day, there's very few classes that had 3 spammable stops within the course of like 15 seconds. But now pretty much every class has like 2 stops minimum. There's some classes that have 3 stops, which is ridiculous. So I think that it's like a 2-pronged issue, right? Players have a lot of information, so they're utilizing all the information that they have to be able to give you like a really solid CC chain. The ability to be able to track interrupts on your entire group leads to you having a perfect interrupt chain. And then I think that the amount, he says, which might in turn lead to less reliance on classes with the abilities to stop a whole pack of enemies for casting. I think that there needs to be a pretty big disarmament of the ability to be able to just like solo CC a pack. I think that the ability to be able to solo CC a pack is fucking stupid. But at the same point, I think that the way that they've designed dungeons requires you to have very elaborate CC chains at a very specific point of time. Like right now, hold on, like even if I go and look at like this, hold on, let me see. Is he my stream on Doge right now? Is this guy keying? Yeah. So like basically, if you're looking to play this composition that you see this team's playing on live right now, the CC chain is very simple. Whenever you walk up to any singular trash pull, this is the CC chain. You go triple kick with the DK, the mage, and the demon hunter. Then you sigil of chains the entire pack into a solar beam. Then you do double demon hunter stop with chaos nova and sigil of misery. And then you do triple kick again. And then you do silent sigil. And then you do demon hunter, or then you do DK blinding sleep. And then you do double druid CC with incap roar and typhoon. And then you do double mage CC with supernova and blast wave. And then you do priest fear. Did you write that down? Because that's the 20-step CC chain on a fucking trash pack. Like, why are okay, the better question is, why did a trash pack ever need that? Now, make sure you write that down, because that's going to be on the test as to what the CC chain is for this season. But yeah, really ridiculous. I think that we need to remove the words might from this, because as somebody in chat said, it shouldn't be might if you start taking away my ability to be able to track offensive CDs, or like cooldowns in general. Like, look, this is like the out of the way. This is kind of the default for retail right now for like what you're tracking. You see all of the utility buttons, and then you'll track like major offensive CDs to kind of tell where people's offensive CDs are sitting. If you're taking that away from me, you know, it better be something that the game doesn't become drastically more difficult, because I could turn that weak aura off, right, or I could turn that add-on off right now, and then it would become much harder. It would literally become impossible to actually play the game. And so, as a result, Blizzard's going to have to lower the amount of complexity on a lot of the trash packs. I think that the requirement of needing to be able to track cooldowns on mobs' nameplates from things like bigwigs is also ridiculous. The fact that that is a requirement to actually be able to tell what the hell is actually happening in the game, I think proves that there is something that is wrong with what's happening right now with add-ons. Incoming heals will also no longer be trackable, nor will specialized buffs or debuffs. But if they need it to be, that should be built into the base game. Incoming heals will no longer be trackable. Like, okay, first off, I've never been able to play around whether or not I see my, like, you know, people use health prediction on some add-ons. Like, I know Cell has health prediction to, like, tell you when you're getting a heal cast on you. I'm gonna be honest, I've never ever been able to play around noticing my party frame is being increased like that. I don't know. Like, I feel like this is like not necessary. Nor will specialized buffs or debuffs. What does this mean? Am I like, is this like tracking buffs and debuffs on party frames? I feel like I don't really understand what he means when he says that. That's just like a blanket. Is that talking about party frames? So I don't really know. I don't really want to say too much. If this is talking about party frames, I don't agree with this. I think that should be built baseline into the game with a whitelist and a blacklist of functionality, and be able to basically make the ability to be able to because here's the thing. Looking at the debuff bar is garbage. And so there's a reason that people put buffs and debuffs on their party frames. It's because looking at this debuff bar in the top right-hand corner, or this buff and debuff bar in the top right-hand corner of your screen is terrible. So that's why adding a whitelist and blacklist to party frames is default functionality for most party frame creators, right? Where you can see what buffs and debuffs are on you, and then you put them in specific points as well. So there's specific buffs, at least in cell opt for me, where I can kind of see, you know, hold on, let me see. Where's the show all on this? There's a way they, oh, here, show all. So I put them in specific spots based off of what they are, right? Like, things in the middle will end up being defensives largely, or things in the middle are externals. Things on the left are going to be defensives. Things on the right, far right of this party frame are going to be debuffs. There's nothing on the left side because that's where I track all of my cooldowns. There's stuff in the top right for like Aug Evoker tracking if I ever want any of that. There's specific like abilities to be able to recolor whether or not you have a poison, a bleed, a disease on that. And I think that those kind of things are really, really cool. And being able to as well tell on a party frame what mob is casting on who, I think is actually pretty valuable. Now, I know that that might overstep like what they're looking to see in terms of add-on computational value, but I do think that at least on a part, it's really difficult sometimes to actually just like look at the mob and tell who it's casting on unless you have a target or you have your nameplate set up in a specific way. But having it be potentially on party frames is actually pretty valuable. So I would want to be, there's specific things with party frames that I think that they should overgive players as opposed to undergive, if that makes sense. As well, role specific party frames are like a huge deal. Healers needs versus DPS needs, very different. Like, I'll watch some demon hunter, especially in raid. This guy could literally be playing with frames off, like raid frames off for all he cares. Same thing honestly kind of happens in Mythic Plus. He could probably be playing with raid frames off, but that's not true for healers, right? It's very role specific. Okay, anyways. It should be part of the default UI. Same is true for tank swaps. If we're building an encounter where your co-tank reaches 4 stacks and some negative effect, you need to taunt immediately. We should be giving you much better information to make that apparent. That's on us. Yeah, allow a whitelist and a blacklist on buffs and debuffs to where you can actually tell, like, if they have stacks. That's the important thing. Another issue they want to make more visible is diminishing returns in PvP and PvE, where stuns or other crowd control effects become less effective after repeated casts until an enemy is immune. This isn't really a thing in the PvE. There's specific situations where I've ran into a composition that's got 4 stuns, particularly whenever you're playing like Augavoker. Like, you play like Augavoker Prot Warrior. What somebody else has got a rotational stun? Havoc Demon Hunter. And then like an Enhancement Shaman or something like that, right? And so the Augavoker has Deep Breath Stun, which is a passive thing. The Demon Hunter wants to stun for... The Havoc Demon Hunter wants to stun for resources from Chaos Nova. Then in theory, the Warrior presses Shockwave to stop the mob. The Shaman can't tell that they're on CCDR. Or you try to press asphyxiate and you couldn't tell that they're on CCDR. Not really a thing for PV. It is occasionally. Very rarely, though. You more often than not know because you threw 3 fucking stuns at the mobs. Yeah, I mean, it's an important mechanic for PvP. Just it doesn't really matter for PvP. At the end of the day, the game should be just as easy or difficult as it is right now, he said, but for different reasons. Part of the goal of the mechanic is to create problems that need to be solved and a bit of the challenge that feels satisfying to overcome it. The goal is to keep similar numbers of wipe counts for normal, heroic, and mythic encounters, early versus late, similar success rates, but to tailor that to the world where the problems are once again in the player's own flesh and blood hands to solve and not an algorithm that they downloaded. Yeah, okay, so I think that this is good. I actually think that this is, by and large, what he stated here is good. There is obviously a very, very large asterisk here on if it is implemented properly. If these things aren't implemented properly, then we're worse off than we were before. But if they're implemented properly, I actually think that this is pretty good. Now, I've seen this tweet from Relo. He said, might be a quit angle if they do all the things that they're saying that they want to do here, not even exaggerating. I think that there's been this situation where to be able to play the game, needing to download a bunch of add-ons and a bunch of weak auras and creating these very elaborate CC chains. I think that, I mean, we had this conversation on the bench for months. Like, Growl and I just kept parroting over and over again. Mythic plus a 2R, Mythic plus a 2R, Mythic plus a 2R. The dungeons are too difficult. Design the dungeons easier. They designed the dungeons easier. Season 2 bangs. Coincidence? Probably not. I think it's because that I don't think that people need the game to be that hard, right? Like, I think that if they reduce the complexity of the game just as a whole, but then reduce it, okay, so it's about counterplay. I had this conversation with Evade before, and he talked about counterplay in the game, and this was all the way back in Shadowlands, where he was like, so on one hand, I could know that this mob is about to start casting and kick it like as early as possible, or I could download an add-on that tells me its cooldown is coming up and kick it frame perfect because I see it on my nameplate. He's like, I would much prefer the earlier situation, because then Blizzard is going to start designing dungeons and raid encounters with the expectation that you have the ability and the knowledge that that ability is about to come up. And that's going to, honestly, as well, reduce the amount of player skill ceiling that you can face just by being a good player. This was in context of just like becoming a better player. And it was kind of an interesting thought process, and one that really I started like thinking about for a long time after I had that conversation with him about the fact that add-ons give you more. While it is nice that they're giving you more, there are downsides to the fact that you have more, because then Blizzard expects you to have those things. And I think that they need to really make sure that players have all the things that they feel like they want or need. I think that once you start looking at nameplates and party frames, people are very, very particular with what they want out of their nameplates and party frames add-ons. And if you were told today that you're no longer allowed to have the party frame add-on you have, and you have to play with the default, people are very correctly so going to be mad. You're getting a much worse experience in a game that is very challenging. And so I think that coming into Midnight is where this sounds like this is going. They're going to have to make sure that the encounters are designed differently, the dungeons are designed differently, and there's these expectations that players are going to have less, but you can't continue to throw the same amount at them, right? Like, if you can't track interrupts and then people are just randomly getting bolted by these chain casters, everybody's going to be mad. The people in the group are going to be mad because they just randomly depleted this key. The healers are going to be mad because they feel like they can't out-heal all this random group-wide damage that's now increased as opposed to decreased, because now you no longer have the ability to be able to stop it or know what's actually going on. I think it's you know, it's fine that they're trying to do these things, but they have to be very, very careful. I actually think that this is the correct approach to the game moving into the future. I do genuinely believe, unlike Relo, I think that this is correct, but it has to be implemented correctly, and it can't be half-assed, particularly the stuff related to party frames and nameplate add-ons. The stuff related to the rotation helper can be implemented, and the cooldown manager can be implemented at 96%, like he said earlier on in here. Where is this? 96%. So getting the cooldown manager and the rotation assist, that stuff at 96% is fine. The tracking of information, if the game is too hard and you're not able to track enough information, the game is going to feel awful. You have to be very, very careful with this. And the nameplates and the party frames cannot be 96%. They need to be 100%. Like, they need to be arguably just as good, if not maybe better than what you can get from add-ons for some reason. So those are kind of my thoughts on this. I think that this is, in general, I think it's really good that they're looking to combat add-ons. Computational functionality and raid encounters sucks ass. The Brute Twister Ovanax, Echo Neltharion, Jailer Bombs, those mechanics are terrible because of how they were designed. The fact that they're looking to design them better in the future and maybe reduce the amount of computational performance that add-ons are going to have on that, I think is a pretty good thing. Yeah, those are my thoughts. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts down in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.